Welcome to Quiet Capital, a library of lived markets. We keep first-person accounts the way conservators keep vellum, dry, flat, protected from the easy warping of hindsight. Tonight we open a ledger from the loudest room on earth, the New York Stock Exchange in the mid-1980s, when optimism wore pinstripes and the anthem was "Greed is Good." Volumes swelled, balance sheets fattened, and a new vocabulary crept in from the upstairs desks: programs, hedges, futures, while the floor itself still ran on breath and nerve. Picture the era: Reagan-bright confidence, a bull market that seemed to sprint without breathing, and early computer strategies promising smoother seas. Screens multiplied. The designated order turnaround system whispered speed. Portfolio models promised protection. But beneath the glow, the market's engine remained profoundly human. Voices, hand signals, eye contact. Here is the question that brings us to this archive. What was it like inside that deafening ring on Monday, October 19th, 1987, when the Dow fell 508.32 points, down 22.6% in a single session, the largest one-day percentage drop in its history? What did traders do when their instincts and the systems they trusted were overwhelmed by relentless, seemingly automatic selling? This is one trader's answer. We will hear the memoir of Frank, now 65, who stood on the stone that day, passing paper, catching eyes, and making markets as the world seemed to tilt. He will show you the euphoria before the break, the first tremors, the moment machines and men collided, and the silence after the bell. Think of this not as a lecture, but as a field recording. Sweat, chalk, and paper dust preserved in ink. Settle in. We begin with the world that made Black Monday possible, and then walk, step for step, to the fall. Keep your ears open. The floor still echoes. Tonight.
Chapter 1. The Roaring '80s Floor.
My name is Frank. I'm 65 years old, retired now, hands quieter than they used to be. I came to the exchange the old way, on foot and at the bottom. Runner first, a badge, thin shoes, and a map of the building in my head. I learned the corridors by breath, not signs. You didn't ask where a booth was, you sprinted there, slid the ticket across, and sprinted back before the ink dried. After a year of errands and blisters, I was a clerk, which meant I could stand closer to the ring, listen to prices land like punches, and begin to understand why a quote was more than a number. It was a promise. Apprenticeship wasn't a program, it was a set of eyes on you every minute. A broker taught me how to read a crowd the way a sailor reads a sky. A specialist showed me what orderly meant when chaos wanted the wheel. I learned that the floor wasn't an office. It was a living thing, tribal, territorial, ranking you without ceremony every morning. Your reputation showed up before you did. Were you clean on your prints? Did you honor a shout you wished you hadn't made? Did you hesitate when size hit you in the teeth? Speed mattered, but not the kind on a screen. It was the speed of deciding yes, no, bid, offer while your shoulder was pinned and a dozen hands were flashing fractions. Toughness mattered, but again, not the movie kind. It was the toughness of taking a bad fill, looking the other guy in the eye, and staying present on the next trade. If you were lucky, they gave you a sliver of a crowd to call your own. That's how you became a trader. Not with a ceremony, but when the ring decided you'd stop dropping the baton and start carrying the tune. The middle 80s felt like standing on the deck of a ship with a constant wind at your back. From late 82 to that summer of 87, prices didn't just rise, they seemed to levitate. We joked that you could buy on Friday, forget what you bought, and sell higher by lunch on Monday. The economy felt wide open. Deregulation in the air, taxes lighter, credit easier, corporate raiders turned into folk villains you secretly studied after hours. Earnings calls were pep rallies. Valuations stretched, then stretched again. And the floor learned a dangerous habit, treating multiples like taffy that could be pulled without snapping. You could feel it in how we stood, chests out, bids loud, the kind of swagger that makes a crowded ring feel like a victory parade. The ticker wasn't paper, it was confetti. Upstairs, the stories were tidy productivity, globalization, American confidence. Downstairs, the story was simpler, more buyers than sellers, most days, and a belief that dips were gifts. We carried that belief like a talisman. New rules of thumb popped up, and no one laughed at them. Don't fight the tape. Don't blink on size. We took bigger bites, tightened our stops, and told ourselves it was discipline, not appetite. Around us, culture harmonized with the momentum. Reagan on the evening news, shoulder pads and suspenders in the morning, and by year's end even the movies would say it out loud. Greed, good or not, was certainly loud. I won't pretend we were blind. Some veterans muttered about breath thinning, about volume spikes that looked like strain, about a dollar that wouldn't hold its chin. But when the cash register rings all day, it's hard to hear a warning bell. We were breathing thin air and calling it clarity. If you ask me what euphoria looks like on a trading floor, it's not champagne, it's repetition. The same trade, working again and again, until you forget it can fail. A normal day began like a fire drill we all pretended was choreography. You hit the coat hook, check your badge, grab your pad, and wedge into the crowd at your post before the bell. Clerks fan out to the booths, phones already chirping like insects in July. A runner plants a fistful of flimsies in my palm. Buy 20 at the market, sell 5, 000 not held. A limit with a fraction that makes you squint. 471.8, 471.4, 473.8. You scan, sort by instinct what can hit now, what can float, and give a nod to the specialist who's reading his book like a cardiologist reads a monitor. He flashes a hand signal. Small imbalance. We can pair this. You brace your feet. The bell is not sound. It's a shove. Bodies tighten. Elbows find ribs. And a dozen voices declare prices at once. You don't speak in sentences, only numbers and size. 7/8 for 5. At a quarter for 2. I raise a hand, 2 fingers curled for 2,000. Chop the air to make it firm. Catch a counter from a broker over my left shoulder, and feel the trade land in my chest before it hits my pad. The clerk at my back is our second memory. What'd you get? 2 1/4. You sure? Print it. He's already writing the ticket, carbon paper smudging his knuckles, stamping time like it matters. It always matters. Paper blooms everywhere, flimsies, stuck to sweat, to sleeves, to the marble underfoot. The tape lags, the ring knows first. You trust eyes more than screens. A misheard eighth can cost a career, so we repeat fills like prayers. At a quarter, at a quarter, at a quarter. When the crowd surges, thought gets in the way. Muscle remembers what judgment taught it. Hit the bid if it's real, lift the offer if it's leaving, protect the client, protect your book, breathe. Deliberation is a luxury, the pit runs on fast truth. Print clean, stand your ground, move on. The first glow of the machines came in sideways, not as a trumpet, but a whisper. Designated order turnaround started piping the small stuff straight from upstairs into the book. Odd lots, marketables, neat little parcels that used to pass through our hands now arrived as if dropped by pneumatic tube into the specialist's ledger. It was efficient, I'll grant you. Quicker prints on the easy trades meant fewer elbows thrown at the open. Screens multiplied in the booths. Guys who once lived by voice now stared at phosphor, quoting a screen to a screen, like priests reciting to stained glass. And then the new catechism. Programs. Basket trades. Portfolio hedges. The talk had a clinical shine delta, beta, dynamic replication words that sounded like steel. Down on the stone, we were polite about it and privately suspicious. Not because we were Luddites, but because our edge had faces. I knew who honored a busted shout and who shaved an eighth when you blinked. I could see a bad print in a man's throat before it reached his lips. A model can't see that. The insurance pitch came wrapped like common sense. When stocks fall, sell futures to hedge, buy them back when balance returns. Smooth the ride, protect the client, fine until everyone's riding the same break down the same hill and the road ice is over. What bothered me wasn't math, it was the premise. All that beauty presumed a continuous market, somebody always there to take the other side. But liquidity isn't a law, it's a mood. It shows up for parades and sneaks out during fires. Upstairs, they measured risk to 4 decimals. Down here, we measured it in breadth and reach. Could you get it done? Right now, at a price that didn't bleed the client white? I respected the silicon. I just didn't trust it to keep its nerve. Specialists were the heart valves of a stock. Open, close, and everything in between ran through their book. Their mandate sounded simple: keep a fair and orderly market. In practice, it meant standing there with real skin in the game, showing two-sided quotes when nobody felt like being brave, leaning against a stampede with their own capital, and knowing exactly how much pain their inventory could take before the spread had to widen. They kept a private ledger, orders stacked like sandbags, limits, stops, odd lots, not helds. The whole neighborhood. They posted indications when imbalance swelled, paired what they could, and when the hole blew wide, they stepped in as buyer or seller of last resort and prayed the next print didn't make them look like a fool. Each specialist had a style, and if you traded on that post, you learned it like a pitcher learns an umpire. Lou ran tight an eighth wide if he could help it and would talk to the crowd with his eyebrows. A raised brow meant don't be cute. A tiny wince meant back off. I'm long and it hurts. Margot managed fear with tempo. She'd slow the cadence, palm down, making us breathe before the next price. When she said orderly, she meant it even if it cost her. Then there was Red, famous for a jaw like an anvil, who took heat like a dock worker and reopened names after halts with a thump, daring the room to argue with the print. Working around them was half craft, half courtesy. If you fed them liquidity when the book went one way, you got a nod the next time you needed a whisper inside the range. Push your luck, fade their stabilizing bid just to scalp an eighth, and you'd find yourself living outside their rhythm when it mattered. On fast days, we watched their hands, not the tape. A specialist tightening the spread by a hair told you more truth than a screen. Inventory was comfortable, breath was steady, and for the next few seconds, this market still had a pulse.
Chapter 2. Seeds of Doubt. The Prelude to the Crash.
By the summer of '87, the air on the floor felt thin, bright, electric, and missing a little oxygen. We were printing record highs, bells ringing like victory laps, but the tape had a new stutter in it. Rallies would surge, then trip over their own shoes. Breath narrowed. The generals marched, the infantry lagged. You'd scan the 52-week lists and see fewer fresh names, more repeats. Momentum that looked rehearsed. Veterans called it late cycle posture. I called it a crowd leaning the same way. Rates were inching up like a thermometer in a closed room. You could hear it in the small talk. Tens are heavy, Fed's got a tone. The strong dollar swagger of a couple years back had turned to a wince. Rumors about deficits budget, trade, pick your flavor skipped across the booths. No one traded T-bills from the ring, but we all felt them like weather. Stocks can ignore gravity for a while, funding costs don't. On certain days, volume was oddly lopsided heavy in the futures, herky-jerk in cash. You'd see the big baskets go through upstairs, and down by the post we'd get the aftershocks. Offers that felt mechanical, bids that felt optional. The specialists could still keep a clean book, but they were working harder to do it, widening an eighth here, flashing an indication there. Volatility had a new twitch, small gaps where there hadn't been gaps, prints that leapt past fair value like a missed stare in the dark. None of this stopped the party. Clients still wanted size buys, still outshouted sells most mornings. But the tone changed. Bravado shortened into slogans. Buy the dip said with a question mark. My pad filled the same, yet my shoulders rode higher, waiting for a shoe I couldn't name. We weren't calling a top, we never do, but we tightened helmets. You could feel it in the way we stood. Feet a little wider, breath a little shallower, eyes checking the exits even as we cheered another high. The market was still climbing, the floor had started bracing. Here's how the insurance worked, told in plain floor English. Imagine you're long a big basket of stocks, pensions, endowments, the kind of size that doesn't turn on a dime. Instead of buying actual put options on every name, the quant said, we can behave like we own puts. When prices dip a little, you sell a little index future S&P, say to hedge your basket. Dip more, sell more. Keep selling in proportion to the slide so your effective exposure stays where your policy says it should. If the market turns back up, you buy those futures back. On a chart, it draws a tidy curve, risk gently declining as price falls, like a hand on the shoulder guiding you downstairs. The pitch was elegance itself, continuous, rules-based discipline. No emotion, no huddling on the phone while the tape screams. Computers would lean for you, minute by minute, taking the sting out of the drop. The premise, though the one that made me itch, was that you could always sell a little into a moving market without changing the market you were selling into. Up in the models, trades were infinitesimal frictionless beads on a wire. Down on the stone, they arrived as blocks. Big, timed, relentless. We felt it most when cash and futures went out of tune. The futures would sag, the ARB desks would try to buy the cheap basket and sell the rich one, and our post would light up with offers that didn't sound like human doubt, they sounded like a metronome. Every fresh downtick called for fresh supply. That's the trick with synthetic insurance. It's safe if you're the only one holding it. But when the whole avenue buys the same fire policy, the fire drill becomes the fire. Liquidity isn't a river, it's a crowd. And a crowd that sees the same exit at the same time does not file out single file. So I kept a private translation in my head. Dynamic hedging meant sell lower, buy higher. It would work right up to the point when it made itself stop working. The week before it broke had a sound I still recognize. Wednesday, October 14th. The tape came out heavy, not a crash, but the kind of steady downhill that makes your calves burn. Bids that usually stood their ground started to blink. You could feel size testing the floor, then leaning. Futures led sagging first, then tugging cash along like a tow line, and the ARBs tried to stitch the spread, buying baskets here, selling there, but the fabric puckered. By lunch the ring's jokes got shorter. By the close, you could hear it in the voice of the specialist when he called an indication. Careful, careful. We marked the pads, shrugged for the clients, and told ourselves it was a clean down day, nothing more. Thursday didn't fix it. Rallies felt like hopping across wet stones, 2 steps, slip, catch yourself. The upstairs phones came with more not held, less swagger on the size. My clerk started repeating fills back to me a beat faster, like we both wanted to convince the tape to cooperate. Then Friday the 16th arrived with options expiration in its pockets. OPEX days always hum, they compress indecision into deadlines, but this one had a grind to it. Index rolls and gamma hedges shoved order flow into the same corridors. We'd see futures dip, and right on cue the mechanical offers would bloom at our post, not like fear, more like choreography. The crowd took it personally. Elbows got sharper, banter turned into clipped numbers, and the specialists widened an extra eighth just to get breath back in the book. Every small bounce died where it should have run. By mid-afternoon, the floor's noise changed pitch, less brass band, more generator. You could feel capital getting conservative, collars tightening around the neck of every print. We went home that Friday with paper dust on our cuffs and a knot under the breastbone. No one said Monday out loud superstition, but the ring had already said it for us. The swagger was gone. The room sounded like rain beginning. Trouble doesn't sleep on New York time. It starts where the sun is. London stumbled that Friday after our close phone whispers said the FC bled in the last hour, bids ducking like pigeons in a storm. By Sunday night, the squawk boxes lit up with Asia. Tokyo's first prince came in crooked, the Nikkei slipped, steadied, then started walking downstairs with its eyes closed. Hong Kong didn't bother with courtesy, futures gapped, and the cash market followed, a set of stairs missing half the steps. Our guys who sat weekends in the futures pits started calling in like weather spotters. Sheets are red. Can't find a clean bid. Every bounce is shorter than the last. Overnight, I kept the TV on mute and the phone next to a legal pad. Quotes came in out of order, time zones tripping over each other, but the theme was steady. What had felt like a U.S. mood swing on Friday was turning into a front moving west. The ARB desks talked about basis blowing out. The London contacts used words that make floor men sit up disorderly. Crossed. A friend in Singapore said simply, "Nobody wants to be long at breakfast." By dawn, the pre-open check-in felt like a firehouse roll call. My clerk, voice too casual, read me the futures marks they were down in a way that told you the first hour wouldn't be price discovery, it would be triage. We sketched contingencies on the pad, who could take size if cash gapped 2%, 3%, more which names had specialists with the temperament to reopen without drama, what hand signals we'd default to if the phones jammed. None of it made the gut unclench. The commute in was quiet in that Sunday night on a Monday way sky, the color of cheap tin, streets too empty for a workday. I rode in with my tie already loosened, watching steam lift from manholes and thinking about exits literal and otherwise. The exchange pulls you like a magnet, even when you'd rather circle the block. By the time I hit the badge check, the knot had a pulse. The weekend worked on us like a slow solvent. Saturday morning, the phones pretended to be quiet, which only made the rumors louder. A client's risk guy called just to touch base, which is how they say, cut exposure without saying cut exposure. Another left a message with 3 versions of the same instruction: trim if we can, hedge if we must, and if it gets messy, call before doing anything, which is how they say, I want control over a thing that won't be controlled. You could hear lawyers breathing behind some of those voices. I took notes I didn't need, because writing steadies the hand. The grapevine thickened. A buddy at a big index shop said their insurance triggers were walking down the stairs, levels ratcheting lower with every soft futures mark. A prime broker warned about margin calls in certain concentrated accounts, a phrase that always means tomorrow's sellers are already chosen. The specialists we trusted most answered our feelers with half sentences. We'll be there. We'll indicate. We'll need room. Translated. We'll try, but don't bring hero fantasies to a fire. At the kitchen table, I did the trader's catechism. Inventory by name, client by temperament, which ones could take a sloppy print and which needed a surgeon's hand. I drew boxes for contingencies gap 2%, gap 4%, gap open no bid, and sketched who to hit first if the book went hollow. Discipline said, follow the plan. Survival muttered, find the exit that still exists. I sharpened pencils I wasn't going to use. My wife asked if I'd be around on Sunday. For a bit, I said, meaning no. I walked to the park just to test my breathing. Leaves were loud underfoot, a good omen, I told myself, as if omens pay margin. Back home, I set 2 rules on an index card and taped it inside my pad. 1, print clean. 2, don't chase ghosts. The second was for me, because ghosts are what markets make when liquidity leaves the room. Prices you think you saw, bids that vanish when you reach. By Sunday evening, the head noise settled into a kind of readiness. Clients wanted a steady hand. My instinct wanted a smaller target. I promised both, knowing I'd be forced to choose with a clock running. Monday would decide which voice got the wheel. Pre-open on Monday was a checklist I could do by muscle memory, but I made myself do it slow, like a pilot before bad weather. First, cash futures. I took the fair value scribbles from the squawk carry, dividends, the usual inputs, and drew a fat box around the spread that would mean normal if such a thing existed. Then I drew 2 thinner boxes outside. It labeled don't trust and don't touch. If the S&P futures lived out there, we'd treat cash bids like mirages until the ARBs proved they could close the gap with real prints, not promises. Next, liquidity map. Names with deep books got green dots, the finicky ones thin float. Chatty rumor mill got yellow. Anything that needed a specialist with a steady wrist earned a red underline and the initials of the post we preferred. I wrote 2 alternates for every red. If post A was jammed, we'd pivot to B, and if B went dark, we'd price like it was an opening print all over again. Phones were already coughing. I told my clerk we'd use short words only. Now, hold, pair, cancel, no speeches, no metaphors. We rehearsed hand signals for when the lines died. Palm flat for indicate only. Clawed fingers for partial. Forearm / for no print. I made him repeat them back while watching my eyes. Not my hands on the floor. You read a man's face faster than his fingers. We built a triage for clients. A-column names who could take heat got first shots at real bids. The delicate accounts got instructions to work wide, print clean, and live to noon. We pre-wrote bursts for the booth, 5 words, maximum to stamp on flimsies when the tape ran minutes behind. Late tape. Trade confirmed. Price firm. Contingencies. If DOT choked, root to shoe leather. If a name opened indication only twice, assume the third will be a trap. If the book went one way and stayed, we'd widen our idea of fair by 2 ticks before trying heroics. Last line on the pad, underline twice. Price discovery before perfection. Then I closed the binder, touched the index card, print clean / don't chase ghosts, and stepped toward the post as the building drew its breath.
Chapter 3. Black Monday. The opening bell.
The badge check felt like rush hour at a firehouse, too many boots aimed at the same door. Security didn't do their usual half jokes. They waved us through with tight faces, and even that told you something. On the floor, the air had a metallic taste, like a storm that hasn't broken yet. Crowds were swollen by bodies you only saw on quarter ends, desk heads in fresh jackets, compliance with clipboards, a couple of tourist execs who never came down unless there was glory or blood. The visitor badges were plentiful, none of them smiled. At the booths, the phone trees were already lit, rows of red and green lamps blinking like a chest monitor gone wrong. Clerks wore 2 receivers at once, pinning one between shoulder and cheek, writing sideways with the free hand. The squawk ran hot Asia recap, London damage, futures prints rattled off without comfort words. Above the din, the old CRTs hummed, that faint ozone smell of warmed plastic and worry. I walked the half-moon from our booth to the post and took inventory the way you count ribs after a fall. The specialist's tie was loosened before the bell. He never did that. His pad was thick, edges furred with eraser dust. Indications were already chalked in ghost numbers, then wiped, then chalked again. He didn't look at me first, he looked at the book. That was another tell. Microtells multiplied. The banter was gone, replaced by clipped fragments. You good? Will indicate. Size where? A runner I trusted jogged instead of shouldered, eyes down so he wouldn't spill the flimsies. A broker known for jokes stood with his arms folded tight across his chest, like he was holding something in. Even the way we stood changed, feet wider, shoulders set, the ring unconsciously bracing for a shove. Phones coughed out the same sentence in different accents, work wide. Upstairs was already anticipating a late tape. They didn't ask for pretty, they asked for real. I checked the cash future scribble on my card. Our don't trust box was flirting with print and tapped it twice without meaning to. Some days, the exchange hums like a parade forming. This morning it thrummed like pressure in a storm front, the kind that presses your eardrums and makes the dogs hide. I caught my clerk's eye and gave him the smallest nod. We're in it. Then I turned to the post, palms dry against the pad, and waited for the bell that was going to change the temperature of the room. The bell didn't ring so much as detonate. The first second was a single intake of breath. The second was impact order slamming into the post like a wave against a pier. Offer! 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 The crowd tilted one way. I threw my first shout, take two, at a quarter. And the answer wasn't a counter, it was a hole. The bid had already fallen out from under it. My clerk barked, "Stale," and yanked the flimsy back mid-scribble. We reset, faster. Quotes shattered into fragments. You'd catch half a price 3i, and the print would arrive 2 levels lower, already gone. The tape lagged immediately, a polite fiction scrolling past while the room lived 30, 40, 60 seconds ahead. Someone yelled for an indication. The specialist raised a palm, reading a book that was changing faster than he could turn the page. He posted a wide field down big, size on the cell, and before the chalk dust settled the crowd hit it like it was a lifeboat. Clerks became hands and shoes. Mine ran tickets to the booth and back with his jaw set, waving a quick claw for partial as he dove through a gap in shoulders. Phones barked, then jammed, then sang with the flat tone of overload. Up in the booth, a voice came through once, thin and high. Confirm anything real. That was the instruction and the absolution. We stopped aiming for pretty. I widened my idea of fair by instinct and reached where the bid still had breath. At a half for one, I chopped it firm. Sold you. Landed on my left, my pad caught the number, and my mouth repeated it 3 times, the way you say a name to keep from forgetting it in a fire. A runner shoved past, eyes wide, muttering late, late, like a prayer. Everywhere, gaps between what you thought and what you got, between where the futures were and where cash could find a floor. The specialist leaned, took stock into his own inventory, flinched, leaned again. One marquee name opened, hiccuped, and fell through its first print as if it were drywall. Time bent. 30 seconds took a minute took no time at all. The room's sound became a single braided rope boots, breath, numbers, paper, and under it, the new undertow, a cadence of selling that didn't argue, didn't blink, didn't look you in the eye. We weren't matching opinions anymore. We were catching knives thrown by a metronome. The DOT printer started to cough, then to wheeze. You could hear it chatter, pause, then a spasm of tickets with the same timestamp, like traffic lights all turning green into a blocked intersection. Queues stacked somewhere upstairs, so what hit our post had already aged in transit. We'd lift an offer and watch the confirm arrive with a price that no longer existed, like getting mail from a house that burned down. Stale. Bust. Don't know. Every third flimsy or a question mark. When DOT hiccuped, the reroutes kicked in. Manual, call down, broker to post, and that only thickened the artery. Booth clerks were now human routers, triaging which lines might carry current. Some orders pinballed, electronic to phone to shoe leather to my pad, losing truth with each hop. Cancels chased fills, fills outran cancels, and somewhere in the tangle a client would own stock twice, or not at all Schrodinger's position, until we could get two humans to agree. Latency isn't just time, it's distance between reality and record. The wider that gap got, the less anyone wanted to stand in it. Bids shrank to feelers, offers stepped away from the curb. That created a vacuum you could taste air rushing toward an absence. Prices didn't walk, they fell through missing stairs. You'd call at a half, and a voice 2 shoulders over would answer nothing there. And you believed him because his eyes were flat and he was already reaching lower. So we changed the mission. Price discovery first, completeness later. I told the clerk, print clean or don't print. If a quote looked alive, we hit it. If it blinked, we treated it like a mirage. Allocations, step-outs, perfect ticket trees, those could wait until the book had oxygen. We carved orders into pieces that matched the market's breathing partials on purpose, because a confirmed 1,000 at an honest price beat 10,000 at a fairy tale. We shortened our words further. Real? Real? Partial. Firm. The specialist, sweating through his collar, widened another eighth and nodded at me like a diver sharing air. Around us, the DOT-Q lights kept blinking, less a system than a plea. The machines hadn't died, they had slowed just enough to make belief expensive. In that pause, humans either supplied a price or the room provided a drop. You could watch the specialists spend themselves like sandbags in a flood. Their mandate didn't change just because the room did. Keep it fair and orderly. In practice, that meant they had to lean into a one-way market with their own money while the tide kept tearing at their ankles. They'd post a two-sided feel cautious, a little wider take in stock to stop the slide, and then take another bite when the first one got swallowed whole. Capital is courage until it's inventory, and inventory hurts when there's no place to hand it off. The book told on them. You'd see the edges of their pad go fuzzy with eraser dust, indications rewritten twice before you could read the first. Indicate only, palm up, then a chalked range, fat enough to fit a truck. If the imbalance swelled, they did the only sane thing. Call time. Not a ceremony, not a siren, just the market taking a knee. We're going to pause. Gather it. Phones went feral, the ring sucked in its breath. Halting felt like betrayal to some clients, but down on the stone it was mercy space to stack the orders, rank them, find any price that wouldn't snap the spine of the next print. Reopenings were their tightrope. They'd start with a wide feel, show the crowd the book's weather-heavy sell, limited by, price likely lower than narrow by inches while staring straight at the imbalance. When they picked a number, they said it with their chest and let the room argue after the ink. Most days that confidence bent the curve. This day, it bent and cracked. Names that defined the tape, IBM big, household big, came back from pauses like paratroopers whose chutes didn't open. A thump, a moment of weightless disbelief, then more air below. You could hear the sound change, less shouting, more involuntary exhale as a marquee gap reset what down meant for everything around it. There's a look a specialist gets when capital turns from tool to tourniquet. Chin set, eyes scanning past you, a tiny flinch he can't suppress when he takes the next bite. We worked with that look like medics feed him what didn't kill him, pull back when his hands shook. Room, he'd say, and we gave him room, because if he broke, the post broke. And if a post broke, our little corner of the market stopped being a market at all, just a stairwell with the lights out and everyone trying not to fall past each other. After a while, you can tell the difference between fear and protocol. Fear wobbles, hesitates, tests, argues with itself. What hit us mid-morning didn't wobble. It arrived in squared-off parcels, blocky, regular, arriving on the beat. Same brokers, same cadence, same sell the basket tone that doesn't look for a face to bargain with. You'd feel the futures slip a notch tick-tick, then almost immediately our post would bloom with offers on the cash names in that index, like the floor was a mirror with a delay. The ARBs tried to stitch it by the cheap stocks, sell the richer future, but the seam wouldn't hold. The basis widened, and every time it widened, somebody's rule upstairs said sell more. That was the undertow. Futures pressure, cash weakness confirms the futures confirmation, triggers fresh futures selling. A loop with no conversation in it. Down on the stone, conversation is the only tool we have. Price is talk, but you can't talk to a rule. We try to reset tempo the old way. Specialist narrows a hair. A few of us step in together, print a confident number, and the print would hang in the air for a heartbeat before the next programmed wave swept through and pulled the level lower. The tape was no longer a crowd's heartbeat, it was a metronome speeding up. Patterns emerged inside the noise. Down a quarter on the future, here came a basket sell. Down another eighth, another basket. Vol picked up, and the size accelerated, as if volatility itself was gasoline on the algorithm's fire. You could almost hear the policy being executed. Protect exposure by selling into weakness. Protect it again because you sold into weakness. Protect it again because, well, now it's weaker. Upstairs it probably looked like discipline, sliders moving on a tidy screen. Down here it felt like a hand on the back of your neck. Humans hate price vacuums. Will throw a small bid into one just to see if there's a floor. But the loop punished curiosity. Step up, and you bought the first rung of a ladder that was being pulled down from above. After 2 or 3 of those, even stubborn traders learn to stand back. That's how the undertow wins, not by panicking you, but by teaching you your courage will be harvested. We were present, loud, willing, and irrelevant to the rhythm that now ran the room. Little stories kept the roof from caving in. First one, a misheard size. A broker over my right shoulder barked 15, and a kid 2 bodies down heard 50. He reached like a hero, chopped it firm, and in the space between his hand and his pad, the market fell a stare. His eyes went wide. He'd just adopted 35,000 shares he hadn't meant to raise. I saw the specialist's head snappy, felt the book tilt, and before the panic could bloom, a gray hair named Sal put a palm between them, flat as a stop sign. Work it, he told the kid, low and even, then to me. Pair 10 with me at the fig, now. We carved it in 2 bites, then a third, bled the slippage into a pocket of bids that still had breath. The kid's face learned a decade in a minute. Sal squeezed his shoulder once. Say size twice, he said. Always twice. Second, almost a fight that became a relay. 2 brokers collided on the same scrap of floor, both convinced they'd been hit at a level that evaporated mid-word. Voices went hard, chests square. The room can smell a shove coming. Before it did, Margot, the specialist on the neighboring post, leaned in without looking up from her book and said, Gentlemen, I will be reopening in 20 seconds, and I will need both of you. It was not a suggestion. They pivoted like soldiers turned by a whistle. One became the buyer of last resort for the reopen. The other took the seller's side and promised not to yank. Margot posted a grave-wide feel. We narrowed a hair, and the print came out clean enough to breathe. The 2 brokers nodded once. Not friends, teammates for a rep. Third, my clerk's save. We had a cancel working on a name that was skipping rungs. The DOT confirm finally coughed up a fill at a price that didn't exist anymore, time-stamped back when oxygen was cheaper. My clerk didn't hand me the flimsy. He held it in the air like a burning match and said, Sequence wrong, don't anchor. If I'd read it first, I'd have started reconciling a fairy tale while the real market slid away. Instead, we hit a live bid with a smaller slice, got color from 2 voices we trusted, then circled back to clean the paper scar once the booth could think. Print clean, I'd written. He kept me from printing ghosts. Those little hand-to-hand wins didn't stop the metronome. But where the algorithm took whole yards, we stole inches, turning mistakes into partials, arguments into structure, stale paper into living trades. In a storm that didn't care about our courage, craft was the umbrella we passed down the line. After the first hour, the idea of normal price discovery packed its briefcase and left. Spreads that lived an eighth wide on civilized days blew out to quarters and halves, then to gaps with nothing in between but hope. The specialist's chalk turned into the only language that mattered. Indication only. Ranges so fat you could park a truck in them, and even those were more wish than promise. We'd show a field down 2, maybe 3, size light on the buy only, to have the next print leap past the bottom of the band like it had been dared. Fair value stopped being arithmetic and became gossip. They saw a bid there. Whoa, a guy. Vain. Before. Quotes arrived like mirages. You'd lift an offer you thought you could trust, and the confirm came back from a different climate. We rewired our heads on the fly. No more courtly dance for a better eighth. No more waiting for a screen to bless what the crowd already knew. The tape was a diary written last week. The ring was the only weather report. We started treating every live price like a perishable good. If it smelled fresh, take a bite. If it looked pretty, assume it was poison. I set 3 rules for the team and said them until my throat rasped. 1. Print clean. 2. Humans agree, and the specialist nods. 2. Limit slippage. Carve the elephant into slices the market can swallow without choking. 3. Live to the close. No vanity fills, no hero trades that make good stories and bad math. That changed the questions we asked. Not can I do it at the fig, but can I do it at all? Not is that cheap, but is that real? We learned new micro-virtues. A partial with a firm time stamp beat a fantasy full. A widened quote with breath in it beat a tight one with a ghost behind the eyes. Sometimes the bravest thing you could shout was pass, because passing kept powder dry for the client who'd still be breathing at 3:55. The market wasn't a puzzle anymore. It was a storm. And in a storm, you don't argue with the wind. You find a door frame, you count to 10, and you keep the roof on. By late morning, the floor looked like it had shed a skin. Paper drifted in ankle-high dunes, flimsies plastered to pillars and cuffs, the marble slick with graphite and sweat. My voice had gone down an octave from shouting. Every sentence ended in a rasp. You could trace who'd been where by the salt maps on their jackets. A runner bent to tie his shoe and just stayed down there an extra second, like the floor might steady him if he touched it. The jokes had died hours ago. What replaced them were small, stunned glances, men and women doing math no one taught us. How much breath is left? How much capital? How much nerve? The big realization didn't arrive as a headline. It seeped in. We weren't steering. We were surfing a wave built somewhere else by hands we couldn't see, rules we couldn't negotiate. Our prints didn't change the tide. Our best efforts just kept a few boats upright for another minute. You felt it when a clean, courageous reopened something that would usually turn a crowd. Barely slowed the slide. You felt it when a perfect partial, carved to fit the market's lungs, was swallowed with no ripple. We had turned from makers into meter readers. The tape wasn't listening. Helplessness on the floor isn't flailing its precision without consequence. We did every right thing, matched real to real, widened when we had to, refused fairy tales, and still watched levels collapse like bad scaffolding. The specialist beside me caught my eye. No drama, just the carried weight of a man holding a line that kept moving backward. Room, he mouthed. We gave him room. The room gave us nothing. Phones kept coughing up fragments. Work wide, confirm later. Any print is oxygen, but the lines were more comfort than conduit. Upstairs voices wanted certainty we couldn't sell. Downstairs, we traded time, 10 seconds one here, 30 there, paying for each with our throats and our legs. A clerk handed me water I didn't remember asking for. I took a sip and tasted paper dust. Somewhere inside the noise, I touched the index card in my pad print clean/don't chase ghosts and understood why I'd written it. The ghost wasn't a price anymore, it was control. The market had taken the wheel and we were the guardrails, dented, necessary, ignored. The work didn't stop. The belief that the work could decide anything, that was what the morning took.
Chapter 4. Black Monday. The Eye of the Storm.
Midday, the floor stopped being a room and became a lung. It expanded, bodies shoving, shoulders locking, paper flaring off clipboards, and then it collapsed, a collective exhale that dragged prices with it. You couldn't hear any one voice anymore, you heard a texture, a woven roar with numbers threaded through it. Phones were useless music rings you couldn't answer, lines you couldn't keep. Runners tried to cut lanes and bounced off hips and elbows like pinballs. You learned to plant your feet, hold your ground, and talk with your eyes. 2 beats for partial, a blink for cancel, jaw set for don't chase. Decision fatigue crept in, the kind that makes an eighth feel like calculus. We shortened our thinking to single moves: hit what's real, pass what's pretty, breathe, and even that felt like threading a needle in a moving car. The post pulsed like a heart under a marathon. You could feel it in the marble vibration through the soles, the way you feel a truck before you see it. The specialist worked the book like a bellows: open, close, narrow, widen, trying to force oxygen into a market that didn't want to inhale. Every time he flashed an indication, the crowd swarmed it, and the next print came out with the sound a crowd makes when it realizes the floor isn't where it remembered. We weren't talking in prices so much as in triage. Who needs the next breath? The organism decided strong hands first, panicked hands second, the rest when the artery unclogged. Time sheared. Seconds stretched long enough to read 3 faces, and a pad minutes snapped shut before a confirm could arrive. I caught myself counting in tens, 10 to steady my voice, 10 to let a ghost quote pass, 10 to remember the index card in my pad. Print clean. Don't chase ghosts. Around me, people made small promises to themselves: tap the pen cap twice before shouting. Touch the post rail before every large fill, rituals that gave shape to the blur. We were no longer 1,000 traders, we were one animal, breathing panic in unison and still, somehow, pushing air toward a price. Then the phones quit being tools and turned into scenery. Every light lit, every bell rang, and nothing moved. You'd jam a receiver to your ear and get a dial tone that sounded like a flat line, or a hiss of crosstalk Cincinnati bleeding into Boston, an upstairs desk overrun by 3 other firms screaming cancel that buy. We started writing CXL across tickets in thick pencil like it could travel faster than copper wire. It couldn't. Cancels and replaces drifted in on delay, meeting fills that had already happened 5 minutes before. In floor time, 5 minutes is geologic. The audit trail fell behind our feet. Stamps, missed stamps. A clerk would slap a time on a flimsy, and the next guy would stamp the one that came earlier with a later time, so the lineage looked like a shuffled deck. Customers called to bust a trade we hadn't even confirmed yet. Others demanded prints they'd never actually gotten, phantoms born from radio news or a secondhand rumor. We started seeing DKS, don't know, stack up like snowdrifts at the edge of the post. Do you know that trade? I don't know that trade. Who owns it? Right now, panic owns it. Upstairs risk wanted certainty we couldn't give. Where are you on 50,000 IBM? Somewhere between trying and gone. They wanted marks, we wanted oxygen. We'd feed them indications with an asterisk the size of a manhole cover subject. Call. Non-firm. And they'd come back angry because their risk sheets treat asterisks like lies. Trust thinned. Not because anyone turned crooked, but because the clock went crooked. In a normal day, you can knit truth out of timestamps and mutual memory. On Black Monday, time frayed and memory argued with itself. So we improvised a different truth. What do we know right now? We started triaging the cue real orders first, optionality later. We read voices the way we usually read faces. The clipped frank, please from a client who never says please, the dead calm monotone, that means someone's already taken the hit and just wants confirmation to show a boss. I kept a little list in my pad, names who got the next call back, names who could forgive a delay, names who might break if we made them wait. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't pretty, and it wasn't fair in any textbook sense. But in a market where the tape lagged reality by entire lives of trades, fairness started with acknowledging realities, lag in pushing whatever truth we could drag through the lines. Faces tell the weather faster than screens. You saw the freeze first, a rookie with a brand new badge, eyes like quarters, pad clenched in both hands. He had a live buyer and a live seller staring straight through him, and his mouth just stopped. I put my palm on his shoulder like I was steadying a ladder. Say size twice, I told him, the way Sal told that kid earlier. We breathed together. 2 by 5. He repeated it, louder the second time, and the trade landed. He blinked, then nodded. Present again. Fury showed up next, sharp and stupid. A broker I've known 15 years slammed his pad against the post and barked at a clerk like the kid had broken the market himself. The specialist didn't even look up. We're all bleeding, he said, flat. The broker's shoulders dropped. He picked up the pad and, without apology, passed the clerk a bottle of water. On days like this, contrition travels faster than anger. Gallows humor stitched holes the tape couldn't. Dow's on sale 23% off, today only, someone deadpanned, and a few of us laughed because it was either that or find a wall. Another voice, relax, it's only money, and we all wanted to punch him and hug him for saying the line that lets the heart keep beating. One of the old-timers, Carlo, just ran out of fight. He stared at a confirm that contradicted itself, slid down the rail until he was sitting on the marble, and pressed the heel of his hand to his eye like he could rub the picture away. Margot stepped over, knelt, and tapped the chalk twice on the floor. Stand, she said softly, as if he were a boxer and she the corner. He stood. He traded the next reopen clean. Everyone had a ritual. A guy in my crowd tugged his lucky tie knot between prints. My clerk tapped his pen cap twice before any big shout. A runner touched the brass rail, always left then right. I wrote the same 2 lines in the margin of my pad, every 20 minutes print clean / don't chase ghosts, like a metronome I could hold in my hand. None of it stopped the selling. All of it kept us human long enough to keep making a market. The day had its thunderclaps, the moments that cracked the room open and let the weather in. The first came on a name so big it set the tone for half the tape. We'd been indication only for 20 minutes, book heavy to sell, specialist chewing his lip. He posted a grave wide field down 12 to 15, and the crowd swarmed it like moths. We narrowed a hair, and then he said it with his chest. The reopen printed 22% below the last clean mark. There was a sound you don't forget, air leaving 1,000 lungs at once. A beat of silence, not reverence recalculation. Every other price in the post shifted its gravity to match. You could feel traders quietly update the floor in their heads. If that's possible, everything's possible. From the rafters of the mind, the Dow started tolling like a bad church. Down 100. The floor hummed with a low, irritated disbelief. Someone muttered routine earthquake. Down 200. The jeers went out of the jokes. A runner trod on a flimsy and didn't look back. Down 300. That one had wait eyes flicked to the old green monitors like they could offer permission to keep standing. The specialist 2 posts over raised his palm before anyone asked indicate only and nobody argued. Down 400. The building changed pitch. You could hear it in the shoes, in the way people leaned on the brass rail between shouts. When someone yelled the running some 508, it wasn't a score. It was a temperature. Too hot to touch. Between those milestones came the smaller shocks that carved themselves into memory. A regional bank we treated as ballast skipped 3 rungs in a single print. A portfolio name with a saintly dividend found no saints at any price we recognized. A glamorous tech reopened into a void and then printed again, lower like the room had blinked and missed a step. Each time, the crowd made the same noise, half wince, half swallow, and then got back to work in a narrower voice. You learned that thresholds aren't lines on a chart, they're switches in people. The ticks weren't just numbers falling. They were moods changing, buyers turning optional, sellers turning absolute, and the rest of us trimming our definitions of courage to whatever the next print would bear. Here's what stung the most. All the things that usually gave us an edge, tone, posture, breath turned decorative. On a good day, you can feel a bid get brave. Before it speaks, you can see a seller's shoulders relax and know you've got a half point of mercy in him. That day, flesh had no tempo the room would honor. We'd square up, meet eyes, and the next wave would tear through before the nod meant anything. I tried to lean on the old tell's thumb on a rail, a specialist's eyebrow, a broker's jaw, and the prints came back like they'd been decided in another building, in another language. We were trading against an absence, no face to bargain with, no voice to shame or charm, just the undertow executing its catechism. Sell weakness, confirm weakness, sell the confirmation. I kept wanting to argue with it, take 2 at the fig, and I'll show you a second, but there's no second when the clock belongs to a loop. Upstairs, somebody's risk slider moved with eloquent precision. Downstairs, eloquence got you run over. What passed for craft narrowed to survival craft. You could still shape a clean print inside the noise, 2 brokers stepping together. A specialist borrowing everyone's nerve for one honest reopen, but the moment you carved it, the metronome ate it. I watched a man who could price a crowd by its breathing stand perfectly still, the way you do when you realize the thing you're listening for isn't in the room anymore. I found myself missing the arguments. Human markets are half fight, half forgiveness, bad fills made right, a busted shout honored, a favor banked for noon. The algorithm kept no ledger and granted no amends. We fought a ghost. It didn't tire. It didn't gloat. It didn't even notice us. So we stopped trying to persuade and started trying to persist. Shrink the ask. Shave the story. Protect the client from the gap, not from the price. Craft became triage, not flourish. That was the humility of it, learning that skill could still matter, but only at the scale of keeping a boat pointed into a wave you would never calm. The floor was full of great sailors. The storm had no captain. We adapted on the fly, the way you do when the map's on fire. First move, widen. If I'd normally quote an eighth, I made it a quarter, if a quarter, a half. Not because I'd gone greedy, because a quote only counts if it survives long enough to trade. Next move, carve. 5,000 became 5 times 1,000, then 10 times 500 when the book's lungs got smaller. A clean partial beat a perfect fairy tale, so we treated size like bread, sliceable, edible, shareable. We triaged clients like a field hospital. Strong hands got first crack at real bids. Accounts that could not survive a misprint got the safest lanes we could shovel open, even if that meant uglier prices. The optional tickets, the ones hunting for pretty, went to the bottom of the stack with a penciled note. If oxygen returns, we built little bridges where the machines left holes. Two brokers, each stuck on opposite sides of a gap, would lean in, and I'd broker the human cross. You show real, he'll show real. We print before this level evaporates. We posted indication only more often, not as theater, but as scaffolding to keep the crowd from running past a floor that wasn't there. My clerk pre-wrote stamps real/partial/firm so we could brand the truth on a flimsy with one hit and move. We learned to ignore the siren song of last, because last was yesterday. Executable beats optimal, I said, until it sounded like prayer. Halts cascaded felt like 200 names blinking pause, reopen, pause, again. The board might tell you the count later, we lived it as a strobe. Every stop stole a lane of liquidity and shoved more traffic into the ones left open. So we found side streets, related names with steadier books, a sympathetic buyer in a different post, a futures desk willing to take the other side of a basis that no longer made sense. One client overlevered and a rumor away from a margin call needed 10,000 off his neck in a name that had gone intermittent. We shaved it into 4 prints across 2 posts and paired the stub with a futures hedge a friendly ARB would actually quote. The math wasn't pretty. The position lived. Sometimes that was the win. Not right, not elegant solvent. The clock got rubbery around noon. Seconds stretched into long, thin wires you could pluck then. A whole minute would snap and vanish between 2 shouts. My hands-old Street Fighter hands started to tremble in the gaps, like the nervous system only felt safe to complain when the crowd took a breath. I tucked the shake under the pad. I told myself it was dehydration, chalk dust, anything but what it was. Fear, not the cinematic kind. The quiet animal that stares from the end of your own arm and asks, "Are you sure?" The mantra kept me from answering. Not the long one on the index card, just the core of it. Print something real. I said it under the roar until it matched my pulse. Print something real. Not the best, not the prettiest. Real. It shrank the problem to a thing I could lift. There was a moment I almost froze. A marquee name came off halt, with a range that felt like a joke. The specialist narrowed a hair and looked up, eyes asking the room to be brave in unison. My mouth opened and nothing came out. I saw the whole chain I'd have to hold. Take the first bite, pair it, confirm it, defend it on a phone that didn't work, wear it if the next print knifed lower. The thought was too big, it tried to sit on my chest. I felt the tremor in my pen, the little rattle that says a man is about to become scenery. Then my clerk did the dumbest, kindest thing. He thumped the pen cap twice against my knuckle, the sound we'd been making all day, and put the flimsy in my palm backward so I had to flip it. That tiny turn reset me, like tapping a watch that skipped. I touched the brass rail left, then right counted to 5, like I'd practiced in the morning, and chopped my hand. At the fig for 2. Firm. The specialist caught it. Another broker met me, and the print landed clean. The room didn't cheer. It breathed. My hands steadied for 3 whole beats. That was the rhythm for the next brutal stretch. Shake, breathe, decide, print, shake, breathe, decide, print. Courage didn't feel like steel. It felt like a series of very small, very ordinary yeses stacked fast enough to look like a wall. Print something real. Again. And again. Sometime after 2:30 the storm didn't end. It just got tired of shouting. The room was still red screens like brake lights on a foggy highway, but the cadence lost a notch. Prints still fell, but not every breath. You could count to 3 between shocks. That tiny span felt like a gift. We used it to stitch the day back together, check the pad totals, cross a couple DKs, switch out a pen that had worn its tip flat. The specialist rolled his shoulders once, like a man testing a bruise, and posted a feel that was merely bad instead of obscene. It drew a few brave hands. Mine, too. Rumors slithered along the brass rail. Policikel. Fed on the phone. Exchanges talking. None of it confirmed. All of it oxygen. A booth clerk mouthed liquidity to me like it was a new sacrament. Upstairs voices softened from commands into bargains work what's real and call if it breathes. You learn to hear hope by its volume it whispers. Down here, it sounded like a few bids that didn't step away, like a seller who agreed to nibble instead of dump, like a reopen that stayed on its feet for more than one print. We used the lull to set the table for the witching hour. I redrew the triage. Who still had powder, who was out of breath, which names would punish a late-day hero, which might forgive one. We pre-carved size into end-of-day slices and wrote 340 window beside anything that needed quiet to survive. Halts trickled instead of cascaded. The DOT printer sputtered in shorter bursts, and our hand signals felt less like semaphore from a sinking ship, more like traffic cops at a bad intersection. I touched the index card print clean/don't chase ghosts and added a third line in pencil. Live to the bell. The room matched me. People straightened ties they'd loosened, wiped graphite off their palms onto already ruined jackets, took the smallest swallows of water like we were stealing time from the clock. A broker 2 posts over lifted his chin at me, no smile, just the nod that says, we're going to make it to 4 if we keep our feet. The tape still lied, but it lied slower. That was enough. We counted down in our heads and readied the last, hardest mile, knowing the final hour forgives nothing and remembers everything.
Chapter 5. The Closing Bell and Aftermath.
Final hour turns the whole day into math with a pulse. Who still has powder? I scan faces before pads. The specialist at our post has that tight jaw look that means one more brave reopen, maybe 2, if we feed him clean. Saul's book can still take a bite if we carve it right. 2 other brokers are out eyes sunken, inventory wearing them like wet coats. I draw 3 columns on the margin. Can reopen, can work wide, don't touch. Names I thought were ballast slide into the 3rd column. 1 glamour stock crawls back to the 1st because the crowd, perversely, respects its pain. We sort tickets for the last mile's partials pre-sized to what the book can swallow without choking. Anything that smells like optionality gets a pencil arrow to tomorrow. The booth squawks about MOC, the market on close books are swelling, and the imbalance reads like a dare. We mark the window where we'll try to thread it 3. 42 to 3. 47 if halts don't steal the lane. Every minute gets a job. 3:35 clean the DKs we can fix 3. 38 check basis with the friendly ARB 3. 41 re-indicate to clients who can still change their minds without breaking. The trap is the hero print, the one you take to prove you're alive, and then wear like a scar at 3:59 when the next downtick pulls the floor away. I can feel it calling. I write it down instead. No last-minute vanity. If a reopen looks wobbly, we pass and stand ready for the second print. If a bid looks brave but alone, we feed it half, not whole, and leave a tail we can defend. Executable over optimal. Live to the bell. The room thins and hardens. Jokes gone, hands sure. Every shout has edges. We are running on battery craft and stubbornness. The countdown isn't numbers, it's breathes. 14 minutes. 11, 9. The specialist rolls his shoulders once more and meets my eyes. 1 more clean print, his look says. I nod. 1 more, then the bell decides what this day gets to keep. 4 o'clock approached like a cliff edge. The last 5 minutes were all long, short, measured breaths. 1 more partial, 1 more confirm that actually matched itself. 1 more reopen that stood upright for 2 prints instead of 1. I watched the specialist's hands instead of the screen. When his fingers flattened and stilled, I knew we were out of improvisations. The booth squawked 30 seconds, and it felt like a mercy and a threat at once. The bell hit like a lid slamming on a boiling pot. First there was the clang, then the echo, then nothing, no numbers, no boots. Just the sudden absence of a sound we'd worn like weather all day. Bodies uncoiled. Pads dropped a fraction. Someone's pen rolled across the marble and nobody reached for it. Paper drifted in the air the way ash hangs after fireworks. For a beat, I didn't trust the quiet. I kept waiting for the undertow to take one more pull. The CRTs kept humming, late tapes still parading yesterday's truth, and then the boards started to catch up blocks of red like verdicts delivered after the jury had gone home. 508, a voice said out of habit, rounding before the decimals arrived. When they did 508.32, down 22.26%, the number felt less like math than like a temperature read on a fever that had finally declared itself. Nobody cheered. Nobody swore. We stood there with graphite on our palms and salt maps on our jackets and looked at one another the way people do after a building stops shaking. A runner laughed once, a dry bark, then covered his mouth like he'd broken something. The specialist met my eyes. There was no triumph in it, only the hollow relief of a man whose tourniquet held until the sawbones showed up. I touched the brass rail left, then right out of habit, then the index card in my pad. Print clean / don't chase ghosts. The day had taken both rules and wrung them dry. The bell had not saved us. It had simply drawn a line. The market was a battlefield gone quiet, and we were the ones still standing in the smoke, counting hands. After the bell, the work grew teeth. No crowd to hide in, now just paper and truth. We pulled into a tight semicircle with the specialist and started reconciling like dock workers, counting cargo after a storm. Flimsies came in clumps, time stamps out of order. Duplicate trade numbers, two fills fighting over the same shares. DKS stacked like snowdrifts. Don't know, don't know, don't know. We built little piles, confirmed, disputed, ghost, then rebuilt them when the booth coughed up a late confirm that made a liar of our neat stacks. Phones found their voices again, only to say everything we didn't want to hear. Street side doesn't see it. Contra won't recognize. Give up mismatch. Back office clerk saints with ink on their sleeves ran between posts with as of tickets and apology pads, stamping time like they could drag it backward. The DOT printer had one last wheeze and spat a dozen fills with the same minute on them, all for prices the market had visited and abandoned hours earlier. We wrote SEQ in fat pencil across the top and moved on. Perfection would have to wait for daylight. Counterparty anxiety seeped through the plaster. A prime broker asked, too casually, whether our shop was comfortable with exposure to a name we both knew was wobbling. A margin clerk from a customer called to say their calls would go out at 8 a.m. Sharp voice steady, like a doctor scheduling bad news. Upstairs, Risk wanted a closing mark. We wanted oxygen for the audit trail. Somebody said the number out loud, 604 million shares, and the room made a small, tired sound. Record volume meant record backlogs. The pipe was full of bolts and rags. We ordered coffee we wouldn't taste and pizza we wouldn't eat, and went line by line. Match the street, then argue. Bust only if both sides breathe. If it lives at either post, we can stitch it. The specialist's collar had turned gray with salt. He stayed until his book could look him in the eye. By 10 o'clock, the pile labeled ghost was thinner, confirmed thicker, and disputed honest. We weren't done. We were merely survivable. Tomorrow would bring margin, statements, and a different kind of weather. Tonight belonged to the paper and the quiet scratch of men and women making the day real. I finally stepped outside, and the city sounded .o. The exchange had been a drum all day. Broad Street at 9 felt like the pause between heartbeats. A few paper scraps skittered across the cobbles like white fish. A mounted cop clip-clopped past with the slow patience of a metronome. I walked a block to shake the floor off my shoes, then flagged a cab with a hand that wouldn't stop vibrating. The driver had the radio low news break every 10 minutes, same words folded and refolded until they felt like tin. Record drop, historic, contagion. The anchor's voice was calm, the way a stretcher bearer is calm. The TV crawl was everywhere bar windows, a deli's little set above the coffee urns, a lobby screen outside a brokerage that had drawn its blinds before noon. Numbers marched leftward like a funeral, minus signs, unfamiliar lows, question marks masquerading as quotes. A bus rolled by with an ad for the Wall Street movie still plastered on its side irony, with a diesel aftertaste. My beeper nagged. I used the cabbie's handset and called the desk. Risk wanted scenarios by morning, not explanations. Assume additional 8 to 12% drawdown and correlated names model counterparty fail on two edges, the kid said, repeating what someone had just told him to say. We toggled through names, drew an invisible map. Who clears what? Who funds whom? Who will call first? A separate line rang an old friend at another firm, whispering that a mid-tier broker might not make its Friday. We promised each other we'd act surprised if it became public. The ride home felt longer than the day. My building's lobby TV had the sound off, just red banners and grave lower thirds. Upstairs, the apartment smelled like detergent and garlic. My wife looked at me and didn't ask anything complicated. "Are you okay?" she said. I stood there, jacket heavy with paper dust, and tried to translate a day without sentences. "We're still here," I managed. We made it to tomorrow. It was the truest thing I had. I woke up before the alarm, throat raw, suit still carrying the smell of paper and graphite. The TV was already on from the night before, Crawl muttering the same words in new orders. Then came the sentence that changed the room's air, even in my living room. The Fed stands ready to provide liquidity, not poetry. Just plumbing, and for the first time since Friday, I felt my shoulders drop a notch. That one line didn't promise prices, it promised a heartbeat. I drank coffee like it was an IV and headed back to Broad. The exchange felt like a field hospital at dawn, bleary, methodical, less noise, more intent. At the post, the specialist had slept in his shirt. He looked better anyway. Indications came earlier, cleaner. Phones worked like phones again. The booth passed down the morning catechism. Banks are open. Funding is there. Clears are clearing. "You have a market," one upstairs voice said, careful not to say normal. We remarked fair value with a pencil instead of a crayon. The futures still twitched, but the basis didn't yawn at us. Reopenings that would have fallen through the floor the day before now bent and held. Not pretty, not proud, functional. A buyer showed half and didn't yank it. A seller agreed to nibble instead of dump. We printed small truths and stacked them. A clean partial in a bank, a two-sided feel in a utility, a reopen in a tech that stood for 3 prints. Each was a stitch together. They looked like repair. Clients called with voices you could recognize again. Some wanted out, some wanted in. Most wanted a version of "Tell me the market exists." We told them the truth, fragile but breathing. I touched the index card in my pad print clean/don't chase ghosts and added one more word in the margin, continue. The day after a panic isn't victory, it's a truce with time. We took it, price by price, and made a market out of pieces.
Chapter 6. The Lessons of 87.
The fixes didn't arrive as thunder, they came as plumbing. After 87, the adults in the room got serious about brakes and pipes. First came the market-wide curbs, what we'd later just call circuit breakers, built around percentage moves instead of points, so the rungs didn't go out of date the minute the Dow grew. Trip the first rung and the whole street takes a breath, hit the second, and you slow the tempo more, reach the last, and you stop the dance. Cash and futures together, not one market sprinting while the other pretends to jog. It wasn't about heroism, it was about time, giving books a chance to refill, phones to connect, humans to become useful again. Cash and futures learned to speak on the same clock. Coordination became a word with teeth. Halts lined up, reopening staged with indications sturdy enough to stand on, basis watched like a gas gauge instead of a rumor. The old let one venue stew while the other boil's habit faded. If the index took a body blow, the whole ring knew which ladder step we were on. The pipes widened, too. Clearinghouses tightened their handshake better cross-margining between equity and futures, more daylight on who owed whom, stress tests that didn't assume sunny weather. Settlement got faster and cleaner. The back office went from afterthought to firewall. We practiced for storms, drills, playbooks, who calls whom when the lights flicker. None of it made markets safe. Nothing does. But it gave us structure guardrails high enough to matter so the next time fear tried to outrun the tape, the system could force a breath before the room forgot how to take one. People like to blame the machines, as if code woke up mean one Monday. That's a fairy tale. The models didn't invent deficits, rates, or nerves. What they did, what portfolio insurance did, was turn a human impulse into a policy and then scale it until the room could feel it in its bones. Sell lower to feel safer. Buy back higher when the storm passes. In a quiet market, that math looks elegant. In a loud one, it teaches the crowd to lean the same way at the same time and then act surprised when the balcony tips. I don't hate the math. I hate the assumptions tucked inside it. Continuous markets, tiny trades that don't move price, liquidity behaving like a tap instead of a mood, volatility as input instead of accelerant. On Black Monday, each of those assumptions flipped. Path mattered more than destination. Size wasn't small. Liquidity was a rumor. And volatility meant to be damped by selling became the very thing that demanded more selling. Reflexivity isn't a chapter in a textbook down here, it's the floor under your shoes getting soft because everyone believes the same thing at once. Afterward, the grown-ups didn't outlaw programs, they fenced them. Thresholds, collars, disclosures. Execution rules that asked, what will this do to the tape right now? Not just what should this do, eventually. Risk got a second question. Not only are we hedged, but are we copying 1,000 other hedges that copy us back? The lesson I kept was smaller and sharper. Dynamic hedging is just a fancy name for selling weakness and buying strength. That can work until your need to sell becomes the market's reason to fall. On the stone, we call that making your own weather. People ask which is better, humans or machines, and I tell them that's the wrong bell to ring. A human can hear the room change before the price does. A machine can count the change before a human admits it. We're good at context, at reading the squint behind a quote, at knowing that a seller with a babysitter problem at 3:30 is not the same as a seller with a covenant problem at noon. We improvise when the map burns. We also carry biases like pockets full of rocks anchoring to yesterday's high, chasing a stubborn idea because it was ours, mistaking volume for truth because it's loud. The code has its virtues. It doesn't get tired, doesn't take things personally, and can slice a basket 10 ways in a blink without smudging a number. It's clean on arithmetic and ruthless on rules. But code is only as worldly as the assumptions you feed it. Regime shifts make it dumb at the speed of light. Liquidity that exists in backtests vanishes on Mondays. Reflexivity prices moving because the rules say they must turns discipline into gasoline. The answer is stewardship. Put rails on the fast stuff, throttles when volatility spikes, collars that ask real or ghost. Before a wave hits the book, kill switches that trip when a strategy starts eating its own tail. Pair that with humans who are trained for uncertainty, not just compliance people who can read silence on a phone line and widen in time, who can say pass without pride in print, without vanity. On the floor we learned this the hard way. Speed without judgment is a stampede. Judgment without speed is a speech. The market needs both and a grown-up in the loop to decide which leads when the weather turns. Frank. Here's the twist the headlines don't teach. The market broke its own speed record, and the real economy barely flinched. 29 turned into breadlines. 08 put cracks in the plumbing that ran through every kitchen table. 87. It was a market heart attack with a strong body underneath. The Fed did the most unglamorous, heroic thing, promised cash to the pipes. Stands ready to provide liquidity isn't poetry, but it told every bank, broker, and back office. Breathe, your counterparty's check won't bounce because the system ran out of oxygen. Funding stayed funding. Settlement kept settling. We were allowed to be traders again, not scavengers. Banks weren't stuffed to the gills with grenade pins the way they were in later messes. Leverage existed, sure, but it lived more in positions than in the architecture of the street. Households weren't sitting on a housing bubble. Main Street kept punching a clock. Corporate America outside the takeover cowboys still made and shipped and sold, and paychecks showed up on Fridays. After the shock, buyers remembered they liked owning pieces of that. We started climbing crooked, unsure almost immediately. By the time the decade coughed into 89, the big indices had found their way back to the old heights, and then some. Not because the fear vanished, but because the machine that throws off cash flows never really stopped. I don't call it a free pass. It was a warning shot with good timing. Technology had learned to yank the wheel. The adults learned to bolt guardrails to the road. The lesson was not crashes don't matter. It was they don't have to become depressions if you keep the pipes open, keep the rules honest, and keep your nerve.
Chapter 7. The Reflection.
Decades on, I can still smell it, the paper dust that lived in your throat, the warm ozone tang of CRT glass, the sour metal breath of fear. I hear the roar as a single chord voices, boots, bells braided so tight, it lives under ordinary silence. I'll be pouring coffee, and the bell from that day will ring in the room that isn't there. The body keeps its own archive. People ask what I'd tell the young ones who grew up on charts that move like butter and spreads that behave. I'd say, learn what a market is when it's hungry. Liquidity is not a substance, it's attendance. In stress, it leaves early and without forwarding address. The last price becomes gossip. Your best bid shrinks when you look at it. Spreads don't widen, they breathe, and sometimes they stop. You don't trade the level, you trade the path. Path is where the pain lives. Understand microstructure the way a mechanic understands heat. Time priority matters until latency turns it into comedy. Q position is a prayer when cancels propagate slower than regret. A confirm that lands late can be a ghost. Stamp it anyway, but stamp it honest. Inventory is courage until it becomes weight, and weight lowers your chin when you most need it up. In a real break, best execution is any real execution. Pretty is a luxury. Partial is a skill. Subject saves lives. Watch hands, not headlines. Read the specialist's eyebrows, the broker's jaw. The floor taught me that people telegraph before they print. If you never learned that language, find another one that tells you when the room is changing. Order book tilt, cancel intensity, message traffic gone brittle, and write yourself a small creed for bad weather. Mine was simple: print clean. Don't chase ghosts. Live to the bell. It wasn't philosophy, it was grip. I have pride in that day. Not because we won anything, but because we stood our posts while the map burned. Trauma and pride live in the same drawer. When I open it, the dust still lifts, and for a breath I'm back on the stone, counting to 5 and making something real. Tools don't have morals, they have multipliers. The same pipes that let a pension roll a basket with a keystroke also let fear scale at machine speed. On Black Monday, technology did both things at once: gave us lanes to print when our legs were gone, and at the same time poured gasoline on the run because the rules told it to. Upstairs, sliders moved with the clean certainty of math. Downstairs, we discovered what certainty looks like when it forgets to look up. The code wasn't evil. It was obedient. It took our oldest instinct cell to feel safe and made it efficient enough to drown us. People say the floor is a relic, a museum piece with bad lighting, maybe. But that day I learned what the floor really was: a human throttle. Not perfect, not pure, full of bias and noise and elbows, but wired for context. A specialist's flinch, a broker's pause, a crowd's shared inhale, those were circuit breakers long before the word lived in the rule book. When screens disagree, a room can still agree. When timestamps lie, two people can tell the truth to each other and print it. That's not nostalgia, it's plumbing of a different sort. I'm not here to romanticize chalk and carbon paper. I traded into the 90s and watched the stone thin as packets replaced footsteps. Plenty of good came with it. Tighter spreads, fairer access, less theater between small orders and the price. But I keep a private ledger of what we lost when the floor's heartbeat faded. We lost the friction that forces a breath. We lost a place where a look can slow a stampede. We lost, a little, the habit of remembering that a market is made of people before it is drawn by code. The double edge is permanent. Tech will always sharpen both sides of intent. That's fine so long as someone keeps a hand on the handle. Because fear doesn't need bandwidth to outrun you, it only needs a path. On Black Monday, the path was smooth and downhill. The lesson I saved is simple. Build rails, train hands, and never let speed pretend to be wisdom.
Frank stayed on the stone longer than most. He traded through the early 90s microstructure revolution, decimalization on the horizon, packets replacing footsteps, the post thinning year by year. He learned new screens, new symbols, new ways for speed to dress up as certainty. He mentored clerks who never smelled paper dust, taught them small creeds for bad weather, and retired when his edge, the room itself, finally went quiet. He left with a pad in his desk, an index card inside it. Print clean. Don't chase ghosts. Live to the bell. Black Monday is not a parable about villains. It's a ledger entry about fragility. We built tools to tame risk and discovered their shadow. Reflexes scaled beyond our senses. We learned and keep relearning that technology multiplies intent, that liquidity is attendance, and that fear, old, fast, unprogrammable, will always test the seams. Guardrails matter. So do hands. Markets run on numbers, but they hold together because people keep showing up when the map burns. This has been a field recording from a vanished room, preserved not to glorify panic, but to remember the cost of forgetting it. From the Quiet Capital Archive, we thank Frank for the breath he saved and the prints he made. And we thank you for listening. We hope this story has served you well. Rest easy.